I really wanted to talk about 3 people who've tremendously helped shape my journey. All the 3 of them are people I have reported to as managers along my journey, but that's not the reason why I put them here. All 3 of them are people who've guided me and who've actually provided very critical inputs at crucial junctures of my career, because of which I could shape my career for what it is. All 3 of them exemplified leadership of a certain kind from which I have learned, and which is why I want to talk briefly about them today. So the first one is really Narayan Seshadri. He was the person who, when I went from SPJIMR to the Arthur Andersen office, he was the partner in charge there. And he actually provided me the opportunity to join Arthur Andersen. And I, of course, that was the beginning of my journey. But more than that, the reason I have tremendous regard for Narayan, and over time he's actually become a great friend, is because after doing 4 years of consulting in financial services, Narayan was the person who introduced me to the field of agriculture. One morning he called me and he said, I want you to join me for a potential client meeting in the agrochemical space. And while Google was too new, I actually went back to my desk and I typed agrochemicals because I had no clue who he's taking me to meet. The rest is history, because I developed a lot of interest in the field of agriculture because we won that project, and I have spent the last 15 years of my career being associated with agriculture. Another thing I learned from him is when Arthur Andersen globally was collapsing after the Enron debacle, in India, the rest of the firm was actually sold to Ernst & Young, and the business consulting group was still trying to figure out where it would find its home. We operated independently for 1 full year, winning clients and winning projects, and it was because of this man and the resilience that he then showed and the confidence with which he kept us together. And he would call Saturday afternoon meetings and said, I'm in this because you guys are in this. So I learned a lot as I look back from him. The second gentleman there is Christopher White. He was actually a client to start with when I was in consulting. And I of course had tremendous respect for his wisdom, his enthusiasm, and so on and so forth. But he was the one who actually spoke to me one day and said, hey, how long do you want to be a consultant with us? Why don't you come join us? And it was eight and a half years in consulting, and I was thinking whether I should continue in consulting or actually join corporate and get some experience. And he was the person who provided it. And then his sheer enthusiasm to actually develop a food business, which was extremely tough in a market like India where margins are so wafer thin, is something I learned from. He just never gave up until he retired, and he's still very active and very associated. Last but not the least, Mike Frank. Mike has been my boss for a very little period of time because his role just got larger a while back. Again, someone who I think believed in me. He's the chief commercial officer for Monsanto at this point in time. Not only did he believe in me, I think he pushed me to take risks. He encouraged me to do roles which I would never have imagined doing. I recall a conversation with him when he actually asked me, what do you want to do next? And I gave him some thoughts and I said, Mike, what's your advice? And he said, if I was to advise you, I would say do the corporate affairs role. And corporate affairs is really getting out of marketing and sales and the business side of things to environment management. And I said, I'm not comfortable talking to media and meeting government people and so on and so forth. And he said, that's why you should do it. And I did it, and and then that sort of helped me round off a very critical experience. And he's continued to encourage me right from the time I joined the company 9 years back until this day. And I owe a lot to all of these people, just for not only what they've contributed to me, but for the kind of leaders they are and the kind of leaders you want to emulate through your career. As I was thinking about what I should be sharing here, I said, okay, let me not just rely on my experience. Let me think back a little bit. Here's what I mean by that. If I was to think of the same things 15 or 20 years back, I'm not so sure the answers would have been the same as I find today. Because at different stages of one's career, one is driven by a lot of different things. But as you look back at a journey of 20 years and try to derive insights and perspectives which created you, the individual, but which probably can be useful to some others as well, you probably see a whole different picture. So what I will share in the next few slides is really my reflections of these last few years and what made me the person and the professional that I am. The journey really began at SPJIMR, and Dr. Banerjee just spoke a little bit about what that journey meant to me, but it meant a lot. SPJIMR, this was the second year when SPJIMR was autonomous. The placements in the first batch, which was autonomous, were outstanding. We didn't know what we were getting into as a batch in 1994, but we still went in there feeling really proud that we had managed to get into this institute, which was so fantastic, and it was a whole different experience. You know, while the institute exposed us to what any management institute exposes students to, which is really a lot of courses, electives, and projects, and case studies, and so on and so forth, as I look back, it was the first time that I actually interacted with people from a very different culture. That's because a lot of people came together from across the country. I had studied until then in my domicile city and known only people from within Mumbai. But this was a whole different world, and I suddenly interacted with people from down south and so on and so forth, and then you actually start appreciating the cultural differences. This might seem like a very small point, but as one grows in one's leadership journey and becomes a rounded professional, inclusivity is such an important element to actually imbibe and demonstrate as a leader. And that's where the roots of that inclusivity or appreciation of diversity were really laid. The next was perspective building. You know, there were a lot of individual courses, some tough, some not so tough, some professors who everybody would be in class on time, some where everybody would sneak in from the back door even late, and so on and so forth. So one can talk about what did we learn in OR versus what did we learn in OB, and so on and so forth. But as I look back, it's all about perspective building. It's all about how those little parts exist in organizations. And then one day they all start coming together, maybe when you get to corporate life. And I'll touch upon this a little bit as we move forward as well. So it was about perspective building in areas that I had never been exposed to. It was about clarity, and this might sound a little strange, but I pursued a finance specialization in the second year. And I did that because I was from an accounting and commerce background. So it almost felt like a natural fit to do finance. And I did all right in terms of how I fared. But I realized that I did not want to do a job which was very finance specific. So I did not want to do project finance, or I did not want to join an investment bank. And that was quite off, because everybody who does finance wants to be either in the top investment bank doing the best deals, or the top broking MNC outfit, and so on and so forth. And here I was feeling quite out of place in those interviews as well. And I had applied to more corporate finance jobs, which means, finance in HUL or organizations such as that, than a lot of people in my batch had. Because I somewhere wanted to develop a more general management perspective. And maybe it was the clarity that I had that I took the Arthur Andersen consulting job, which then gave me a very different kind of an experience. But I approached it with a certain clarity. Maybe it was a risk, but it worked out for me because that's really what I was interested in. SPJIMR really about core values. And our batch, we just finished 20 years. About 4 weeks back, of a batch of 120, 58 of us got together. After 20 years, that was quite something. Lots of people have achieved a lot of things in the batch. People have been very successful entrepreneurs, started from scratch. Some have started, failed, started again and been successful. Excellent roles in multinationals, placed all over the world. They are actually come down from various places. But at one level, everyone is so humble and so down to earth and continues to relate to each other as people. And that's really something that we learned at SPJIMR. Right? To continue to demonstrate the humility no matter what you achieve in the eyes of the world, because you still need to be that person that everyone can relate to, and being very genuine. And I actually continue to imbibe and follow that. Just as an aside, I had when my role of getting the CEO role was announced, and there was a press release made, and then there was a photograph that went with it. And the next day I had the first meeting with my team, which was actually my peers. One of my team members said, "My wife actually saw your picture and said she doesn't even wear makeup." So I probably take the being genuine and as real too far. But I think everyone in the room found that comment a little insightful, and it kind of struck me as well a little bit. Lastly, fun. And I say this because I do think I could have had more fun than I did. I was a little serious, but I think the fun ends after you finish studying and doing your management and you land up in this corporate jungle, and then you're spending 14, 15, 18 hours, and the rest is history, and you don't know when the 20 years went by. So that was really my journey at SPJIMR. The one nugget, the one pearl of wisdom I carry unto this day is from late Dr. M.L. Srikanth. He was the dean at the time we were in SPJIMR, and he gave us a talk before our placements. And in that talk, he said a lot of things. I frankly don't remember a lot of things that were said. He said one thing which hit really hard. which struck me that day and which haunts me and reminds me of him and what he said every single day. He said, all of you in this room would be wanting to know whether the day zero company is actually shortlisting you or the day one company is shortlisting you. And many of you will feel disappointed because you didn't get that day zero or day one job. Don't think about that job and don't compare salaries. Think about your career. And I think looking back, and I actually took that advice even at that time and I followed it all through. And those words were very profound and they have a very profound meaning. I'm not sure a lot of students approach management education and jobs after management education with that perspective. But I think that stayed with me right until this day, and I try and share it with as many people as I can, especially students and the younger generation who I speak to. So when I got out of SPJIMR and got into the corporate world, right, this was the beginning of my career journey. Some knowledge, some skills, new perspectives, a little bit of OR, a little bit of OB, some case studies, some marketing. I mean, it was all a jumble. And then it was all about how do you piece all of this together and make something meaningful out of it. That's really how I look at my journey. The one thing, and I must say I wasn't very clear about this when I started. The one thing that I think makes me who I am today is because I, somewhere along the way, defined a very clear purpose. So initially I did consulting for 4.5 years and I enjoyed it because I was learning. And I was learning about, looking at an organization and working cross-functionally as opposed to looking at silos and looking functionally. And I enjoyed that. But when I got into the first sort of assignment in the sector of agriculture, and I got into it deeper and deeper and deeper, I thought there is tremendous opportunity to learn in this sector. India is still just scratching the surface, and this is a sector which can only grow and develop. And as a person who was 4.5 years out of B school, I had this big penchant for learning, and I thought that is what it would be. So my purpose at that time was learning. And then I got into Bunge, which was Chris White's offer to me, and then got on to Monsanto 2.5 years after that. And that, I kind of made a shift from the penchant for learning. I continue to learn. I continue to believe that all of us can learn. But I shifted from that to actually, it became a passion for me. Because I have traveled the length and breadth of rural India in this country, all the corners of this country. And I have sat in farmer homes on the floor and had food with them. And I have had the opportunity to see what a big difference the relevant products can make to their lives. And that's really phenomenal. So, I do what I do today, not because of the position I have, not because of the role that the organization gave me or the various roles it gave me, but because I enjoy doing what I do. And I believe that when one is doing something which makes such a phenomenal difference to someone's life, it's really worth it. I don't have conversations with my colleagues about, one day in life we'll retire and give back to society. I don't need to, because I think every day, me and my organization are playing a role in contributing that something. And I would urge everyone, all the students especially, to really define the purpose. And everyone here to really get management students to think about why are you doing management? Why do you want to pursue a career in the area that you want to pursue it in? And so on and so forth. Because when you answer that why, I think you find answers to a lot of things. And you stop worrying about the 8-digit or 5-digit salary or the title that comes on the card and so on and so forth. And the whole profession takes a whole different meaning. And then what you contribute in terms of what's called discretionary effort in HR parlance, it just goes to a whole different level. And every organization appreciates it. Choices I made. I've spoken about them. I took, I made critical choices. I got into a sector I knew nothing about. I Googled agrochemicals. I then got into agriculture. I moved away from consulting. I knew I could continue to grow. I said, no, now's the time to get into corporate, because if I continue to grow in consulting, no one in corporate is ever going to give me a role which is parallel. And I will get stuck forever, and I would never have experienced the other side. So there were a few choices I made along the way, which helped as well. The risks I took. At Monsanto, I spent the first 2.5 years leading strategy, because that's all that they would offer me with the kind of resume I had. It was a consulting resume with a strategy experience at Bunge. So no one was going to give me an operating role. But 2.5 years later, they actually started talking to me about an operating role. And the choice was between a small business, simple to run, and a tough business, which was actually going through a downtrend at that time, which was the corn seed business of Monsanto. And I chose the latter. And I chose the latter because I infinitely believed I could turn it around in 1 year. I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. It took 3 years. But the kind of experience it gave me and the kind of character building it did for me stays with me until this day. So in one's career, one has to take risks. Sometimes they pay off, sometimes they don't. But one wouldn't know unless one really took a risk. And that's something I think students should be spoken to about and told about, that career is not just about going from, it's not a ladder that you keep going up one after the other, one after the other. It's about the experiences that one gains. Lots of mistakes. I made mistakes. I made mistakes in simple things like pricing or deciding the season price of the products, to bigger mistakes where we may have made decisions or a judgment which didn't go right. Two things. One is to learn from the mistakes and to have an organization which is accepting of mistakes and which encourages people to rise up and actually keep moving ahead. So it's never going to be a journey which is just a steep curve all upwards. We all go through it. It's important not to give up. The corn business I spoke about, I was very confident I'd turn it around in a year. It did not turn around in a year. And I think the second year also we didn't achieve our numbers. And for 1 month, I agonized over my failure. Because I had never failed in my academics or, up until that time never failed. And I saw that as a failure. And for 1 month, I kept telling myself, this is it. I can't fail so many times. Maybe I should just give up. And then one Sunday, I sat down and reflected and wrote down some thoughts. And I said, if I give up today, I will never know if I can come out of this. And I will never have the courage to deal with a tough environment like this in the future. So I stayed on, we turned the business around, and it gave me tremendous confidence, the ability to bounce back. So that was another important experience. Last but not the least, caring and inspiring others. And I've had my own journey in this. So when you're in consulting, part of the reasons of one of the big expectations of clients is that there is no mistake in your reports and presentations. It's literally that. So the amount of referencing and checks that happen on a presentation or a report in consulting is incredible. There are people who specialize in it virtually. And you end up becoming a perfectionist without realizing it. And then you enter the corporate in-house. And every time your team makes a presentation or people make a presentation, you're trying to rewrite it. And then you get really strong feedback. And then you're told, just lay off. Tell us what you want and we'll put a broad story together and let's just finesse it a little bit. Right? So it's taught me over time that you've got to value what people bring to the table. You don't have to try to make them what you are. It's about inspiring them, giving them direction, and then letting them be. And sometimes they will fall, and it's okay, because that's how they will learn, and that's how you will learn to take the flak for the failure of somebody else and grow in the process. So that's another important piece of the journey. A lot of people, I get questions, especially being a woman, saying, now that you have hit the glass ceiling, what is next? And I frankly find that question very strange for two reasons, because I don't believe it should be called the glass ceiling. Also, this sense of, oh, you've now arrived, because I fundamentally believe there's nothing called just arrived, right? It's a journey. These are points in time in a journey. These are points in time which tell you we are willing to give you more responsibility. But now you prove that you can, sort of deliver on that responsibility, and then we'll figure out what to do with you next. So there really is no such thing, and I think this goes back to the humility piece that I spoke about from SPJIMR. So leadership really is a journey, and I believe that unto this day, and I believe that even if it's CEO of Monsanto Corporation Global, or the CEO of Google, or whoever else, everybody's on a journey. Of course, they are very good at it because they've just done years and years of it, but it's a journey. Because for a CEO of Monsanto today, he's dealing with trends in the environment where farmers have information on a mobile phone, which did not exist when he began his career at Monsanto. So that's a learning in itself, and we as an organization are going through a huge transformation. I'll wrap it up just with some thoughts on, so what's the role of a business school in really help frame this journey for students who go through that business school? And I must say that I haven't kept in touch, so I don't know what the curriculum of management institutes today is. So pardon my ignorance to that extent, but I'll just share some thoughts based on what, just what I've reflected upon. So what are we looking at in the world outside, right? It's truly a global world. And we'll say, so when was it not a global world? When we were doing finance, we read about Nick Leeson at that time. It was still a global world. But I think it is far, far more global now, right? There's so much conversation on Brexit that happens across the globe because it impacts everyone. Or there is so much discussion on the US elections today because it can potentially have an impact on the relations between India as a country and the US, and so on and so forth. So the definition of globalization today is not just a definition, it's far more real. The unexpected always happens, right? All of us think plan A and plan B, but there's always room for plan C. And I have been rudely shocked with what's possible. 1 year back, we had a situation with, and I won't get into a lot of details, with our licensees. A few licensees decided they don't want to honor contracts. The next thing we knew is they had gone and spoken to the government, said a few things about us, and then there was a new regulation that came in. It's still in the courts, that's a different matter. It came out of the blue. This year, the business profitability of our company has got wiped off by 80% in 1 year because of one regulation. Absolutely unexpected. We didn't know what had hit us when it happens, but it happens. And then you have to work through it, and you have to, all this stuff about the corporate affairs experience really comes handy because you realize that there's a huge stakeholder group to manage. Customers have a lot of choice, right? You go to Amazon.in and you'll always find 600 shirts. Whenever did you find that? You probably went to a store and found about 100 of them. Today there's probably 600 being compared in terms of quality and everything. So there's a lot of choice. Customers always also have a voice, and a very loud one. All it will take on Twitter is to talk about an experience on the last flight I took from Mumbai to Ahmedabad, and the rest is history for the airline. It could be either great, or it could be, there could be lots more people sharing that kind of experience. So customers have always had a voice. It's a much louder voice, and it gets amplified before the company even wakes up the next morning, right? So that's another big change that has happened. There was a time when we used to say that information, there's only data, we need information, and so on and so forth. I think with the advent of the internet, and just with open source, a lot that's happening, there's a lot of information available. The differentiator really is insights. And not only insights, but the speed at which a company, an organization, people can draw those insights and then actually make decisions and implement the actions coming out of those insights. And last but not the least, really digitization. We all, even in the agriculture sector that I'm in, we are still talking about, the product will go from our plant in Hyderabad to the CNFA, from the CNFA to the distributor, from the distributor to the retailer, and then to the farmer. And then when GST happens, we all start discussing how GST will impact this supply chain. But there is a digital world out there. The farmer probably wants to order even his bag of seeds on the internet. And he probably wants it delivered to his home and not have to walk or take a tractor and go to the close-by store to actually buy that packet of seed. And that's changing business models. And we are all still trying to gear up to those business models. So coming to what might this mean for business schools and the curriculum, and maybe it's all being taken care of, so pardon me if it is, but really global business acumen, right? Maybe more discussions on the impact of global events and changes, and not just business events, not when two big mergers happen, but what about these elections? What about a war in another country, and so on and so forth. The other thing is stakeholder engagement and management. I think courses on what is your stakeholder map, or even case studies in that, and what does it take to manage these, because this is all relationship related. I mean, you cannot get much done without actually investing in those relationships, would go a long way. The choices, right? So why does a company actually develop the products or the services that it does? There's a very powerful TED talk by a gentleman called Simon Sinek. If you just type Simon Sinek TED talk, you'll find it. And he actually talks about how customers don't buy what you want to sell to them, but they buy it because of why you want to sell it to them. And he makes some interesting contrast between different companies and why some companies are successful and why not. New mediums, right? So how do you really market? How do you look for customer feedback? Market research of the kind that probably we studied when we were in our first year is very different from how you can get feedback, probably even when you don't want it from customers, and really looking at what those techniques might be. Speed of mining, so courses which really expose students not to techniques, but to examples of companies which do this fabulously. And here I think really bringing in startup type of organizations to speak to individuals, because there's some phenomenal work that's happening in the startup world where people are trying to create new capabilities, which I think corporates, who've been there for hundreds of years may take a little more time. Some are ahead of the rest, but there's great insights there, and I would really encourage that in addition to all the famous names and the big companies and the Fortune 500s and all of that, the institute should look for startups, look at startups, bring them in to actually share their experiences in areas such as this. And lastly, the D of marketing. All of us learnt about the 4 Ps, then the 6 Ps and the 7 Ss and all of that. I really think digitization has changed the entire paradigm of marketing, and we are all still figuring out what that's going to mean. It's probably going to be a whole different world out there 1 or 2 years from now. But I think courses in this area probably would help as well. Last but not the least, all our schools are called management education schools. And there is a very large difference between creating managers and creating leaders, right? And I don't need to talk to this august audience here about what that is, but there is a very, very large difference. And I really think in management schools, we should introduce leadership education through exposure to people who can come and talk about what their leadership experiences are. So it does not have to be a course curriculum of a typical kind, but start exposing them to what that journey is like. And that journey is very distinct. Initially in one's career, one is an individual contributor. It's about what one does really well. Then it is about, I managed my team really well, and as a team we delivered this. And then you sort of move on to inspiring and things like that. And I think it's important to at least start giving some exposure, so that going back to Dr. Shrikant's words, people understand that's what a career is about. And it's not just, sort of getting those positions and your card changing every 2 years. Also, I wanted to talk briefly about women talent. So there's a lot of requirement that, one independent woman director in publicly listed companies and so on and so forth. The paradox is there aren't that many, and there aren't that many available, right? So I get requests, and I get a lot of requests because the talent is very, very thin. And therefore, I think there is an opportunity to encourage more women leaders, women into management, and then sort of grooming them in the arena of leadership. And while organizations have a lot of programs and initiatives that are happening, I think just the source pool ends up being very, very small. And we just need to create a larger source pool, because even after that, many will make choices of sort of giving up a career and all of that. You'll still have a pipeline which is healthy and which can be built over a period of time. So I had a few thoughts, right? Firstly, catch them young. So if you look at the t-shirt this girl is wearing, it says scientist, right? So she's sort of wearing a t-shirt which says, I want to become a scientist. How about Indian Management Conclave actually taking the initiative, visiting schools and beginning to orient students about what management education is? Now most of them won't directly jump to management education, they'll go through something else in between, but you'll seed it in their thoughts for consideration a long way ahead. Follow them around after that. Right? They keep going into different streams. Some become engineers, some become doctors, some become lawyers, and so on and so forth. But all kinds of people have passions. I know of an eye doctor who, after practicing for several years, actually undertook management education and enjoyed it thoroughly. And he'd probably go back to his profession, or he may change his profession, I don't know. But it was very insightful to just interact with him as to why he even moved on. So I think really, not only going to schools, but then going to maybe the IITs and all those relevant institutions would be important. And then role models, right? Really share experiences from role models so that people see that it's possible and hear from journeys and careers and all of that and feel inspired, and then actually start thinking about a career for themselves. I just wanted to end with, and Amit asked me this question, what is your mantra for success? And that's why I want to end with this. I'm not sure that I started my professional journey with a mantra for success at all. And I don't think I have enough experience to prescribe what that is. I can just share what it means to me. I think success, the definition of success, is specific to every individual. For me, that definition is not the position I hold today. It is not the salary that I draw today. It is not whether I will get a global role in Monsanto or any other company after that. Because that's just not my definition of success, right? It's something very personal. My definition of success today, probably it would have been different 15 years back. Today is really to make a difference, right? Make a difference, and I don't want to say motherhood stuff like, make a world of difference to the world out there in society at large. No. Make a difference to every person you interact with. If it's an employee or a team member in your organization, if it is a customer, if it is a trade partner or a distributor, whoever you go to, leave that conversation at a place better than where it began. And I've approached every role and every step in my career to leave something in a better place than when I took it on. And that's really, if I can call it, that's probably my mantra for success. So those are just some thoughts that I had to share with this audience. Thank you for your attention, and gratitude again for, for this honor. Thank you.